It's so good to see you
Good
again.
to see you.
Thank you so much for coming to talk to me. I appreciate you.
My pleasure.
So let me tell you what happened. I had a whole different conversation that I was ready to have with you, but then something happened, and I had an experience with a client, and they were frustrated because they had gone through the process of buying a home. They're in the process actually now buying a home, and they have a lender, and they said the lender would send them information without communicating with them. And so I said, really, I've never, had that previous experience. So I want to know, how big a deal is communication? I'm just going to ask you a few questions of all the different things that came up in my conversation, and maybe you can help people out on how things should go.
So it's critical. So, I always give this analogy, Nikki.
Mm-hmm.
I could theoretically perform brain surgery on myself if you send me a manual, okay? But I prefer really to go to an expert and have them do it in a hospital setting, okay?
Absolutely.
And so this whole idea of the instant mortgage and all of these other instant, you're going to take a rocket and we're going to do it. Well, you know what? It's not fair. Because in the mortgage industry, we speak our own language. It's called mortgagees. That's the name I gave it, okay? And a buyer needs to understand, number one, the process. They need to understand who is involved in the process. They need to understand the steps in the process.
Absolutely.
And they need to be prepared for comfort levels, for cash they need, and monthly payment.
Okay.
Most importantly, they need to do that before they really go looking with you.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay? And that way they're able to establish with you what to look for.
What they can afford.
So an agent, a loan officer that just sends information to people and doesn't speak to them, that's not good. That's not a good lender, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So you need a lender that's going to actually sit with you. Okay,
Absolutely.
so if you're in Baltimore and you're going to be doing an online loan with a lender working in the basement in Kansas, that's not necessarily a great scenario for you. I never force my clients to come in, Nikki. You know that.
Absolutely.
But I always make it available. And I'd rather sit like you and I are sitting, eyeball to eyeball,
That's right.
and explain it to them and understand where they're stuck and have them understand the process and answer their questions. It's a different interaction if you're doing it over the phone versus in person. But either way, you still have to communicate.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about that. So when people come to me and they say, I found this house online, I'd love to see it, can you take me out? The first thing I say is call Brian and have a conversation with Brian, pre-qualify with Brian, and then find out exactly what you can afford. So take us through that scenario. So once I say, find out what you can afford and what you're qualified for, and then we can know exactly how much house you can get and what the payment level of comfortability is for you. I don't even know if that's a word, but today
It is now.
Okay, great. So then I say, hey Brian, I'm sending over so and so, or I give them your number and they call you, and then you say what? Bring me what? What do
So
they have
I
to do?
say, bring me your pay stubs, your W-2s, your bank statements.
Okay.
If you're divorced, I want to see your divorce decree or
Okay.
separation agreement. If you're self-employed, I want to see 2 years tax returns.
Okay.
Well, because with your clients only, we pass on the blood sample and your analysis. We don't take those just for Nikki's clients,
Thank
right?
you.
Otherwise, we do. But we're going to sit down. There's a couple of reasons to do it. There's 3 big ones. First reason is the client needs to make sure they're comfortable. There are situations now where, I know you're an expert negotiator, and so you might be able to negotiate some seller help with closing costs or structuring a deal a certain way, price-wise. Well, we don't know that until we sit down, right?
Absolutely.
The other reason to do it is you're in a very competitive market right now. There are way more buyers, as we all know,
Absolutely.
than there are homes for sale. And when that happens, the seller wants to make sure that your deal's going to go through. So you must have a pre-approval letter, which I will give to you on their behalf, so that the seller can take that contract. And then third, the buyer needs to be comfortable. It's just that simple. The buyer needs to know, here's your payment, here's how much money you need at settlement, and here's how we're going to do it. See, my job is to educate. So I will sit with the buyer and I'll say, okay, here's VA, here's FHA, here's USDA, here's conventional, here are grants, here's this and here's that.
That's so good.
Let's figure out what's right for you.
Absolutely. So let's talk about a couple of things you said. One thing I'd like to talk about is grants. So I teach first-time homebuyer classes. I don't know if I've mentioned that to you before, but I teach first-time homebuyer classes. And one thing that's important for me is to be able to say, listen, there are grants out there for you. Talk to your lender. I don't necessarily get into specifics because when it comes to finances, I try to stay in my lane as a realtor and give all the financial questions over to the lender.
Exactly.
So how important is it for a lender to know about grants and be able to assist their client with that information? And do you send them somewhere else to find that information, or do you have the grant information for them?
So I'm going to tell you something that distresses me a great deal. Okay? I've had recently 2 different clients who were very eligible for grants.
Mm-hmm.
They went to an online lender. One went to an online lender, maybe one of those Kansas people in the basement. And the other went to a local lender.
Mm-hmm.
And both those lenders said, that's not the right program for you. You're not qualified. Guess what? Neither of those lenders offer the grant programs. And so what they told the people was actually a disgusting lie. Okay? They did it so they could keep the client. Now, in terms of grants, there are city grants, county grants, state grants. We just are rolling out 2 national grant programs.
Really?
And so when I sit with a client, I explain the grants to them. We can determine their eligibility.
Okay.
And most of them, actually all of them, they're going to have to take homeownership counseling and do a one-on-one. We go further, Nikki. We actually give them a list of places they can go.
Oh, that's great.
Because that's critical.
That's great.
Our job is to make sure you're pointed in the right direction and doing the things you need to do.
Now, is Homebridge Homebridge affiliated with all the different grant programs, or is there something they can't do when it comes to Maryland mortgage programs or things like that?
We do all the Maryland mortgage programs.
Oh,
we do most of the
great.
grants. There are some bank grants, like
Okay.
Federal Home Loan Bank Grant.
Okay.
We don't do that because we're not a bank.
Okay.
We're a mortgage
Absolutely.
lender.
I understand.
But for the most part, we have almost everything else out there.
That's perfect. That's perfect to know. So we talked about affordability and payments. Now, if someone is qualified, let's say for a $200,000 house, and they're like, "Great, that's wonderful. I'm qualified for $200,000," but they say, "But I want my payment to be at about $1,500 a month, right? With everything included." If that doesn't work out, if that formula, doesn't work out, are we taking them down, or do we find a way to make that work within what they are?
Well, so it's some of it's out of my control.
Okay.
Because it's interest rate. And I
Absolutely.
can't necessarily change the whole market in the country, although I've tried. Okay? So, a couple points on that. We are going to qualify someone up to.
Okay.
So we're going to say you can go up to, meaning that person may be able to go up to $400,000.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean they have to.
Okay.
Doesn't mean they're going to. Just means they could. So we give them the max,
Okay.
and they can go anywhere in between.
Right.
But what most people don't really understand or deal with, some people will say to me, "Well, put money down." Well, how much you got? Well, I got $2,000. Well, guess what? Every $1,000 is only going to change your payment $5. It's not going to really make a big dent. So you talk about the importance of sitting down and meeting with a client. It's not just about programs. It's not just about product. In many cases, what I've been able to do, let's take your $1,500 client, okay, and they got $2,000,
Yeah,
okay, and they have a Visa account that has a balance that is and the payment's $100 a month.
Okay. Okay.
See, I might say, don't put that money down on the house. Pay off your Visa.
Okay.
And now you got an extra $100 in cash flow a month you're comfortable with.
I like that.
Do you see what I mean?
I like
And we can do that when we meet with someone, when we speak with someone. Your online rocket guy or gal, they ain't going to do that. They're just not. That's not, it's very robotic. And so that's part of being a good originator and looking at someone's total picture
Absolutely.
and allocating their assets correctly.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. So I have one more question for you. And basically this came from my client saying that the bank send her paperwork and never discuss the changes that were made on that. Do you find that is that customary practice in lending, that you make changes money wise, rate wise, and you don't have a conversation about that first? Is that customary, that you just send off the paperwork? How does that usually work? Because I had never heard of it being done like that.
Anytime there is a change in circumstance, there should always be a communication with the buyer, and they should always be made to understand what the communication is and what the change is and how it impacts them.
Okay.
But when you do it right the first time, it shouldn't happen that way. So things happen sometimes. You can't help it.
Absolutely.
but that shouldn't be happening. That's the sign of a bad lender.
Okay, because I'm only asking these questions because they were asked of me.
Yeah, they're real world.
And I said, you know what? I'm talking to Brian tomorrow. I'll ask him directly because I want to be a realtor and stay in the realtor lane.
But you know what? You and I collectively have to make sure that we're doing the best for that client.
Absolutely.
Property-wise, financially, and it goes all hand in hand, Nikki.
Well, thank you so much, Brian, for talking to me today. It's always a pleasure to speak to you.
Yes,
so
likewise.
Next time,
You got
how
it.
can people reach you?
443-324-8424. How about you?
443-615-0043. They can
What a
reach me
beautiful
though.
smile.
Thank
I
you
love
so
that
much,
smile.
Brian. See you next time.
All right.
Bye-bye.